Hey, I'm James Larry Brown, the son of James Milton Brown and Estelle Hargrove Brown. My father, James Milton Brown, was born in the house here on Holt Road that we live in now. My mother, Estelle Hargrove, was born over in Madison County, close to the Tennessee state line, like going off the highway from Huntsville to Fayetteville. They met after my father returned from World War II. He was in the Army over there, and one day he was coming home from town, and my Papa Hargrove gave him a ride. And at that time, the Hargroves lived on Mooresville Road on the west side of the road, and the Browns lived on Mooresville Road on the east side, close to each other. So when my papa got to his house, he drove around in the yard and parked. My dad got out and walked over to his house. Papa came into the house and he told my mother, Estelle, he said, "That's a good boy right there. You ought to get to know him." My mother said she looked out the window as he was walking through the yard, and she said, "Well, we'll see about that." But they were married in 1946, and I was born in 1949. When they were first married, they rented a house in Athens that was just north of Athens College, about a block or two. And my father had saved up quite a bit of money when he was in the Army, and they were living off the money that he had saved. Now, my father loved to go to movies, and so he spent a good deal of his time after they were married that winter going to movies. My father had B positive blood, my mother B negative. And so because of that, my mother had several miscarriages. She even had one stillborn baby who was born after she had been pregnant for 7 months. Finally, I was born in 1949. And my mother was very happy about that. When I was born, they had moved out to New Cut Road, west of Athens, and that's where they were living. We lived there until I was probably 1 year old. And then they moved over onto Mooresville Road, northeast of Athens, and lived on a small farm over there. My father was a sharecropper, and he was also going to school on the GI Bill, which paid him money. We lived there on Mooresville Road for a couple of years there, I think 3 years. And it was a small 4-room house with no electricity and no running water. The house that we had previously lived in, where I was born, had no electricity and no running water. And so what we had was, you'll see here, my grandparents had given my parents a kerosene lamp. And so that provided all the light that they had for the house. And for a good while there, they only had the one. And then my mother found another one and bought it, so they had 2 kerosene lamps. You could have light in more than one room at a time. My mother cooked on a wood-burning kitchen stove. She would gather wood from off the farm, chop it up and start a fire and do the cooking there. She also used that wood stove to heat her irons when she would iron clothes. My mother was a very good cook. She had been taught by her mother, and she had a lot of good recipes that she had memorized. One of the things that happened to me when we lived on Mooresville Road is that when we lived there on the farm, we had a couple of horses. I think we had a cow and some pigs and some chickens. And so one day, I heard the pigs making a lot of noise out there in the pig pen. And I told my mother that I was going to go out there and feed the pigs some corn. We had corn in the barn. And my mother said, "You better not go. If you go out there, that rooster's going to get you." And I said, "Nah, he won't get me." So I went anyway. I walked out of the house and went out into the barn lot, walked across the barn lot and got up in the barn in the corn crib and was getting me some ears of corn to go feed the pigs. And then the rooster came around the corner, and he was right there close to where I was. And so I sat there for a little bit, just kind of watching him through the crack in the door. And I was waiting for him to go away so that I could get down out of the barn and feed the pigs, but he didn't go away. He just kept staying right there close to where I was. So I'm not a very patient person, so eventually I decided to make a run for it. So I jumped down out of the corn crib and started running toward the gate. And the rooster came after me, and he chased me down, and he flew up on top of my head and perched on the top of my head and started pecking me in the forehead with his beak. And I was screaming bloody murder. So then my mother ran out of the house, and she got the rooster off my head and chased him away. And so that had a real effect on me. I was scared of chickens for the rest of my life. Another thing that happened when we were there is my daddy's younger brother Bill came over one day, and he brought my cousin Charles Harris with him, and they wanted to ride our horses. And I didn't like that. I didn't want them riding our horses, but they did it anyway. So I was out there in the barn lot when they were getting on the horses to ride, and I was making sure they didn't do anything wrong. When I was just turned 4 years old, we moved from Mooresville Road up north near Ardmore to down to the experiment farm on Mooresville Road south near Belmina. The experiment farm was a big farm, 760 acres, owned by the state of Alabama. And it was run by Auburn University because they were an agriculture school and they did agricultural research there. So my daddy hired into them as a farm worker. He used to drive a tractor. And then the families were also expected to work there and help out. So the women and the children were expected to chop and pick cotton and corn. So when I was a very young child, I actually started picking cotton when I was 2 years old. I'd be out there with my mother, and she would make sure that I worked hard and picked as much as I could. My mother was a good cotton picker. She could pick 350 pounds of cotton per day. And that's more than anyone else in the farm could pick. Cotton was the big cash crop in the area back then. Most farmers all over northern Alabama grew cotton for their cash crop. We also had corn, soybeans, wheat, oats, barley. We raised cattle, pigs, and chickens. And so it was a good life there. My daddy didn't make a lot of money, but they furnished us with a lot of things. We got a gallon of milk every day. We got half a dozen eggs every day. And every 3 months, they would slaughter a steer that weighed about 1,000 pounds and divide the meat up between all the families that lived on the farm. Every year, every family had a hog that they would raise. And when it got to be about 300 to 350 pounds, they would slaughter the hog, and we would have that meat to eat for the rest of the year. We also had big gardens on the farm. We had big orchards on the farm. We had pecan trees. We had all kinds of stuff that provided food for us. It was a good place to live, and I probably ate better than anyone else I've ever known, even though we didn't have a lot of money. So that's where I lived up until after I married, or when I married, and it was a good life there on the farm.